has a happy ever after. And after this story, there's an after party.
Me?
Yeah.
I have wine. I have coffee. I have plantain chips.
I'm jealous.
I drank the last of the tequila that we had straight out of the bottle, and it was really gross.
With or without worms?
Without.
Good
But
choice. I think after watching Ravenous,
I feel like I'm in the right headspace to talk about it now.
That's good. Welcome so much to season 2 of Happy Ever After Party. I am Sam Logston, coming to you from an undisclosed location.
I am Amanda Pierce. I'm coming to you from my apartment with Xenu. Hi, Xenu.
Aww.
Did you like Ravenous? Do you like the feeling to talk about it?
So, a little bit about why we are starting the season off with this and not Once Upon a Time.
Hey, Sam.
We want to end of story.
Hey, Sam,
I don't
why
need
are
to
we
owe you an
talking about
explanation.
this and not Once Upon a Time?
Well, besides the fact that we're adults and we can do what we want, life has been kind of rough, and the second season of Once Upon a Time does start with something that makes me legitimately angry, and I kind of wanted to not be angry for a week.
just
so
for a
starting
minute.
off with this is nice. But also, Ravenous stars Once Upon a Time's very own Robert Carlyle.
God, he's gorgeous.
It's great seeing him be totally, like, he is not over the rumple-humple. He's, like...
over the rumple moon.
He is. He is beyond the Rumpleverse.
God, he's perfect in this.
Yeah. So this is also going to be kind of like a weird review because I don't want to talk about what makes this such a good folklore movie right away. We will get to it.
Yeah.
When the time comes to talk about it, we will do that. I actually want to talk with Amanda first about the production of this movie because by all accounts, this movie should not work.
Yeah. It honestly should have never even... The fact that this movie was completed is kind of a minor miracle.
To say the least.
And the fact that it ended up on screen as good as it did is pretty great and kind of a wonder.
It's weird because if you don't know about the production, there's a lot of things that seem... Okay, let me put it to you this way. There's things in the movie that seem mismatched and discombobulated and disorienting. And none of those things have to do with the production itself. Yeah. That's just the tone of the movie. Listen, and the things that work really well are the things that had problems. So I'll pass the reins to you.
If you think the tone is strange or not great, then you're just wrong, and you have to learn how to be comfortable with being wrong. Because the tone in this is exactly what it needs to be to make it a great and memorable movie, in my opinion.
In both of our opinions. I would say that this is definitely in my top 5 favorite films of all time.
I'd say it probably has gotten there over the years.
Yeah, like when I first saw it, it was definitely in my top 10, but over time, and especially after my most recent viewing of it, I definitely am like, okay, this is in my top 5 because I've never seen an other movie like it.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a unique creature. I've never... I can't think of any other movie that I could say in the same sentence as Ravenous. Like, Ravenous is like... nothing. It's not
the
like
closest,
much of anything else.
The closest thing that I can think of that comes to Ravenous is a Trey Parker and Matt Stone movie that I won't mention by name right now.
The musical one.
The musical, yes. Spadoinkle.
Ugh, I'm gonna put my plantain chips to the side because I'm gonna have to talk for a minute.
Yeah, and I say it comes the closest. Does that mean it actually is comparable? No.
No,
not
because
by a mile.
I've not seen it, but from what I gather, that's a horror comedy.
Yes, and
this is a comedic horror.
Yes. The former relies on comedy to make fun of horror and thriller tropes. This movie has funny moments in it and does have like this kind of absurdist tone to it, but at its core, it's actually a pretty serious story. You know, it's just sort of done in a way that's like, we're going to hold your hand through the horror, but you still have to watch it.
Well, I have something to say about that, but I'm going to hold off on that for a minute because the production of this movie is kind of gonzo. I forget who the original director was.
It was a man originally.
Yeah, it was a man, like most movies originally. And through a bunch of different reasons, like rewrites, and he wanted more production time and
I think
more money.
The writer left too.
Yeah. I'm not sure about, I think that sounds about right.
I think the writer may have left first and production value was being spent, and that was the leading contribution to why the director left.
Yeah, the director was fired. He was actually fired. It was apparently micromanaging from the studio and some other stuff. But what are you showing me? Oh, Milko Manichevsky. What else has he done?
He's done a couple of things, but don't dwell on him. You need to talk about why this movie looks the way it does.
Yeah, so he was fired 2 weeks into production because he was being, from most accounts, somewhat of a diva. I hate to say that, but it sounds like he was being very demanding of the studio and wanted them to back off a lot.
Yeah. And they hired somebody with TV experience who's used to filming on a smaller budget.
No. Before they hired who ended up directing it, they tried to push Raja Gosnell on them.
Oh, no.
And the cast revolted.
No. Yeah, oh, my God. I missed that.
Yeah. The cast is just like, no, we're not going to do that. The only thing he had directed, at least movie-wise, up until that point was Home Alone 3, a.k.a. the worst one.
Yeah.
Since then, he has done The Smurfs and Smurfs 2, the Scooby-Doo live-action movies, and most recently, 2018's Show Dogs.
Oh, God.
Which has, I believe, like a 3.7 on IMDb.
Yikes.
So that was probably a good decision, let's say.
Yeah, thank God Robert Carlyle recommended Antonia Bird.
His old friend, British director Antonia Bird, rest in peace. Yeah, Robert Carlyle recommended her. And she came in and had a week of pre-production.
And she is not a stranger to working on difficult subjects. She I've looked at some of the other stuff she's directed, even like the documentaries and stuff like that. And like this movie did not scare her.
Well, in like a lot of British TV, I'm sure she dealt with short production time and low budget. Or tight budget. I won't say low. I don't know actually how low this budget was. Off the top of my bean. Oh, yeah. 12 million. Yeah, that's not a lot.
Even for when it was made, that's still pretty low.
And it made 2 million at the box office.
Which is a travesty.
Life isn't fair. But yeah.
This film deserved better.
She had 1 week of pre-production, and I saw an interview with Robert Carlyle where he's like, just to give you an idea, pre-production can actually last years. Like, actual years, and she had a week to get everyone in line and get started on filming this. And
I mean, like, that's why Marvel was able to do what it did and create the
mhm,
universe it did, because they knew that it was going to take years for the kind of like high budget films they were going to make. So
mhm.
literally spending your resources in pre-production for a shit ton of movies
Yeah,
actually saved them a bunch of money.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he also had something interesting. The first scene that they shot was Calhoun in the bath, where they're giving him the
Oh.
bath when they first find him.
Hmm.
And he said, this interview's on YouTube. You can find it pretty easily. And he was like, okay, she showed up on set the first day and we were all ready to film. And she's like, okay, let's get on with it. And he's like, everyone just stared at her. And she didn't realize that Americans work differently than British people. And they wanted to be told, like, you have to go to this mark, pick up the cup, and then go back to this mark, and then, say your line here. He's like,
Hmm.
in British TV and British movies, they would just say, like, okay, action, and you do what you feel like, and if you F up, it's fine. You'll just redo it. But they wanted
Yeah.
like exact direction from her, and she said she just looked at him like, what are these people doing, like, help me. And he's like, I don't know what to say, love, like, I don't know what to do. So she had to kind of handhold a little bit to get through to an American production.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it ended up with a female director, Antonia Bird. And
Yes.
this is often mentioned with female directed horror films. There aren't many, but this is often mentioned as one of the better ones.
It, which is kind of unfair because I feel like there's a lot of good female-made horror movies that are out there. They just aren't celebrated. Um,
No. That's why
even
there's a
like
Women in Horror Month, which is apparently a
mhm.
thing. I don't know what month it
There's
is, but
crap. I can't remember their actual names, but Twisted Twin Productions. They're uh twin sisters from Canada. They made a movie called American Mary, and even though it does have like a bit of a timing issue right at the end, like 90% of the film is engaging and it's really, really well done for the type of genre that it is. Like, there's not a lot of women who get celebrated for like specifically like body horror kind of
mhm.
stuff. And like, I hate using the word gore porn, but that's sort of like the era in which it came out. And you would probably put this movie alongside something like Saw, you
Yeah.
know? And it's just like it it sucks that you just aren't hearing about like non-male directors making horror, and it's not necessarily feminist, but I
Mhm.
will say that under her direction, you can tell that it is not made through the male gaze.
You can tell with this movie for sure.
Yeah, the
I
the
have
first
things
time I
to
watched
say.
this, the first time I watched this with you, I showed you the D. Amanda Hagen review of it, and
Mhm.
she mentions the homoeroticism, but I feel like that's really just the wrong way of looking at it. I mean, you could
Mhm.
definitely read into it. I do. I
Well,
think it's fun,
in that
but it's
same
just not through the
interview,
male gaze.
in that same
That's it.
in that same interview with Robert Carlyle,
Hmm.
the interviewer mentions, like, hey, what about the homoerotic elements? And Robert Carlyle actually says to the interviewer, oh yeah, I totally got that from the beginning.
Hmm.
So he's like, yeah, it was definitely at least on his mind. And he
Yeah.
admitted it to the person who was interviewing him. He's like, oh yeah, yeah, no, totally. There's some homoerotic elements, but there's also like one woman kind of in this movie, one female skeleton, and one alive woman who is probably the smartest person in the whole movie.
She gets the best deal out of everything.
She
And
nopes her way out of that movie right when shit starts to go real bad.
oh yeah, it's great. It might be one of my favorite bits in the movie too. Just the
Also,
last bit.
also, no women.
Yeah,
When David Arquette's going off.
yeah.
No
No,
peyote, no funny
no,
weed, no women.
and then
No
she's just like,
women.
no women. Oh God. I don't feel
God
like
bless
talking about.
Martha.
I love Martha so much. Before we talk about the movie proper, I do also have to mention one of the most engaging parts of the movie, the music and the sound editing.
Oh God. That's
So
it. It
there's,
definitely leads to like an unbalanced, uncomfortable atmosphere that the film is trying to make, which is why I'm saying if
yes,
you think it's dissonant, you're kind of wrong.
it's, no, when I say dissonant, I don't mean it in the sense of like the
No, I
film
mean
doesn't
like
know it's
bad
dissonant.
dissonant.
No, 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 no. It's disorienting. It's
Yeah.
intentionally disorienting.
I, w-
That's what I mean by that.
I wasn't calling
Um,
you out. I was calling them
oh,
out. The
them
people
out.
listening who were like, why is the music all goofy and silly when shit starts to hit the fan at the one point?
Yeah, it's deliberate.
Yeah, no,
Although
totally.
this is weird, and I kind of have to stress this too. Like the whole production of the movie is bonkers. There's two
Hmm.
people credited for the music in the movie. One of them is Damon Albarn from
Hmm.
Blur, and the other one is Gorillaz artist Michael Nyman.
Hmm.
This was not a collaboration. They were both brought on at different parts through production.
Oh God.
So, in terms of the dissonance, and this is where it could have been bad, is because it wasn't an actual collaboration. There could be parts of the movie where the tone is really, really different,
Yeah.
but it works to the story's advantage. And
Listen.
that's it's a great story, and that's sort of like what kind of makes the production work in spite of it.
Essentially, if this movie was a baby, it was a condom break that led to a child prodigy.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
I don't know why that came to my mind, but essentially, it was a very, very happy accident that this film ended up kind of almost accidentally brilliant. And I credit Antonia Bird and Robert
I
Carlyle.
They definitely do a lot to make this movie what it is.
And
So
frankly,
let's
Guy Pearce, whose face is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the first 30 minutes of this movie.
yeah,
Who's like
let's just
nonverbal acting.
do you just want to like jump in on this?
Let's jump on it
Let's jump on it.
and drink some
Oh, and
coffee.
for those of you who are tuning in for the first time out of sheer courtesy, consider this
A spoiler alert.
the movie begins right away. If you had any kind of doubt about the tone of this movie being somewhat comedic, it starts with a Nietzsche quote. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. Immediately followed by, from Anonymous, eat me.
Yep.
Yep, that's how the movie starts.
Hey, guess what? Do you want to see
What?
what this movie's about? Because that is...
No,
God damn
it
it, I'm
certainly
still
wears its
avoiding it.
themes on its sleeve.
But what is this movie about, though? I wonder. This movie called Ravenous.
Mmm.
Eat
By the
me.
way, I have not watched the newer Netflix movie of the same title with a different subject.
Nor have I. Who cares?
So I think mostly because I love this movie so much, I kind of just been like, I don't want to watch another movie called Ravenous. It's not going to be as good.
It's not my hashtag not my Ravenous.
Yeah. Basically. So
If you came into this thinking it was the one that didn't have Robert Carlyle in it, what are you even doing with your life, and where have you been the past X many episodes?
yeah, like if you're coming in here season 2 not knowing what we're about, I am really sorry. If you thought that 20 minutes in we were going to have a point, no.
No
Welcome to the
points.
show.
This is a big old bouncy ball of a production.
Yes, much like Ravenous.
All jiggle, no point.
So Guy Pearce plays Colonel Boyd. Is it Colonel or Lieutenant?
I think
it's Lieutenant.
I think it's Lieutenant, but I could be wrong.
I think it's Lieutenant Boyd. Okay. Yeah. Yeah,
he is
he's
a lieutenant.
Yeah, so Lieutenant Boyd, right at the beginning of the movie, is presented with a Medal of Honor for the heroic act of crossing enemy lines. Oh my goodness. Why can't I remember the date? I'm an idiot.
1800s
1850s?
Mexican American War.
Yeah, so right during the Mexican American War, he's presented with this Medal of Honor. They have this big, elaborate steak dinner with the rarest, bloodiest.
Listen, if you ever want to go vegetarian, watch Ravenous.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Ugh.
Going back to the sound editing, the clinking of the platters is really driven up, so it's very maddening. The squishing sound effects when cutting the steak are pretty bad. It's all intercut with images and flashbacks from whenever he was on the battlefield, and you can hear his breathing. And I'll come back to this in a bit. But Boyd's breathing can be heard getting louder and louder and louder and louder until he just has to like run off and vomit and roll credits.
Yeah.
It's a really good establishing scene because, like, again, visual storytelling.
Yeah.
You can just tell that something is wrong with him right away. And
some kind of PTSD is going on with this poor fellow, I would say. Unwelcome flashbacks. Yeah.
And we're also really quickly taken to where the film takes place for most of it. His superior, General Slauson, basically is like, hey, I know you're not actually all that heroic. I know you were a coward. I know that you basically just pretended to be dead to cross the enemy lines and you didn't actually help your men out. But because you were presented with this honor, it would look bad on us.
Yeah, he basically said we could shoot you in the head, but it would probably send a bad message. So we're going to send you to the middle of nowhere.
Sierra Nevadas, everybody.
Yay,
up in northern
Fort Spencer.
Yep. Up in Northern California. I swear this will bear relevant to a conversation later on. So we're introduced to everybody who's at Fort Spencer, and honestly, it's a great cast. Who all do we have? We have Lieutenant, or sorry, is he Lieutenant Hart or Colonel Hart? Colonel Hart.
Colonel.
That's right. Yeah, him and somebody else is a colonel.
Private
Colonel
Hoffer.
Hart, played by Jeffrey Jones,
Ew.
who has a lot of good quotes in this movie. I'm not going to address the elephant in the room regarding Mr. Jones.
Ew.
I'm just going to say Google it.
Ew. Or just don't and realize he's problematic and continue on not supporting him.
Yeah, don't support him, but I'm going to be very hard pressed to say that his acting is bad in the movie. He does a very good job. He does his lines really well. He actually has one of my favorite lines in the whole movie. But, you know.
Problematic.
Yeah.
He was the principal from Ferris Bueller. Don't Google him.
Yeah. It's nasty. But, you know, I'm applying the Sarkeesian method here, where I am enjoying my media and being critical of it. So he's in the movie.
Yeah, he's fine.
He's fine. I enjoy his bit. Jeremy Davies plays Toffler, who
Is fantastic and has one of my favorite quotes in the movie.
he does. That's, yeah. Of all the Ravenous quotes, he might have the one that I use on a regular basis.
Yup.
We'll get to him.
But he's
He's a bit of a
the
religious fanatic.
layman or pious person.
Yes, he's feeble-minded.
Yes, he certainly is. God bless.
I think it's funny because the way that he's introduced is he's trying to get this cross set up on one of the buildings at the fort, and you just hear Hart mentioning him. It's like, well, we have Toffler here. He is our personal ambassador of Christ, and like the cross is just not staying fixed on the roof.
Maybe because it's a godless place.
Symbolism.
Symbolism.
David Arquette, the
over-medicated.
Private Cleaves. David Arquette plays David Arquette, but in the 1850s.
Major Knox, who never met a bottle he didn't like.
He's a doctor.
He said he's a veterinarian, so he's the camp's doctor. Don't get sick.
Yes. And I think in terms of Toffler is the cook. Or no, Cleaves is the cook, and he's like,
yeah.
I'd say don't eat, but everybody needs to do that. We have a mask for mask, blonde-haired, blue-eyed man. Neil McDonough, I think, plays him.
Yes.
So this Aryan, buff-looking super soldier
is introduced by screaming half naked in a stream.
And his name is...
Say it.
Right.
Say it. Yep.
And
he told him to steer clear of him.
Yep. I'm not going to read into that too much more. That's all we really need to know.
And Neil McDonough is perfect.
Yes,
and he's the only good part of Paul Blart Mall Cop 2.
I just enjoy his screen presence every time I see him, and I'm not gonna lie, it's always because I imagine him screaming naked in the water.
He's like Flex screaming, like all of his abs are there.
It's like a 2-second, 3-second shot, but it's pretty much the poster of the movie.
It's ingrained into my mind. It's pretty fantastic. And we haven't even gotten to what this movie's about yet, really.
And I don't care. We're taking our time. This movie does such a good job establishing all of its characters that, for it being the kind of Hammer-esque movie it becomes, you genuinely care about all these people.
Yeah.
You do. It does a very good job of making the world feel very lived in, even if you're not familiar with this part of American history. There's some anachronistic things, and I'm not going to dwell on that because it's not important.
Nobody cares.
No one cares. Even the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, the movie actually accounts for, and I'll get to it.
If you want historical accuracy, watch The Witch.
The Vivitch.
The Vivitch.
So yeah, we're up here with our
and you missed Martha and George too.
But I was getting there. Martha and George, the only two good people in this camp. They're both played by Native American actors.
Yeah, he said something interesting. Oh yeah, he said the fort was inherited from the Spanish. And Martha and George were, quote, locals who kind of came with the place.
Yeah, it's... that line is creepy, but I also feel it was deliberate. To be like... No. Yeah.
It's kind of like, the people who originally would have settled and lived in this land are just locals who, quote, came with the place.
Yeah.
And they both have suspiciously Anglo-Saxony names.
Mm-hmm.
Just just could be a thing to note.
Now, as far as I saw, I think the actress who plays Martha has not really been in a whole lot of movies, but Joseph Running Fox, he still acts, or at least he was still acting up until a few years ago. So if he's currently working on any projects, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, he unfortunately does sort of just get typecasted as that native guy.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, like, on the one hand, am I happy that nobody was doing red face? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was only 2 of them. And, as we see, it would probably be a little bit more interesting if it was more about them. But the movie does end on a more positive note for at least one of them. So we'll get there. So we have this little misfit cast. We're enjoying our time there, and Boyd is still being plagued by his PTSD, and I think Hart really just kind of picks up on that a lot and like is a little bit more in tune with his more gentler side.
Yeah.
And he talks about being here and there being camaraderie, but you still every once in a while just have that feeling of escape. And we get this line. Hold on, where is it? The only thing about escape, though, is the chance you might end up someplace worse. And as soon as that line is spoken through the window, we see Daddy Carlyle.
Yay, Daddy.
Yes. Looking a hot mess. The soldiers go out to try to find him. They see him passed out. They believe he's hypothermic. So they warm that bath that Amanda was talking about earlier. They get him bundled up. We get to see his butt. And Robert Carlyle delivers one of the best soliloquies I have ever heard.
Yes.
Why he was out there. Do you want to weigh on this at all, or?
Well, the longest story short, the soliloquy is basically he is Calhoun. Is that his name?
Calhoun.
Yes, Calhoun. I know him by Daddy Carlyle. He was part of a wagon train heading west, and there was supposed to be a shorter route through the mountains, and they ended up getting trapped by snow and sought refuge in a cave for 3 months. And then they ran out of food. And then one of them died. And then they did what very hungry people will do, which is eat each other. They started with the dead one. And then they killed Janus, which I think I mentioned before, maybe, which is the Roman, I want to say, god that has 2 faces looking in 2 different directions. Or 3? I don't know.
Yeah, the multi-headed one.
Yeah, which might be a thing you want to hold on to for a hot second.
I am.
But they wanted... Yeah, they ended up killing everyone except for Ives, who was the first one to resort to cannibalism. And I forget her name. The wife. One of the wives.
Mrs. McCready. Or no,
yeah, that was it.
Was she the only woman?
She was the only woman who was surviving. It was just
that's Mrs. McCready.
When Calhoun left to get help. So that's his speech thing. And there were 2 things I kind of wanted to say about this thematically, which I don't know how much they pop up after this. But there's kind of 2 things. There was one article I was reading. Actually, I was directed there from Faculty of Horror, called "You Are Who You Eat." And it talks. Let me see this. Where are my notes? So they talk about man pain versus main pain.
Main?
main character pain.
Okay, because
So, yeah.
my dumbass went to like the horse's mane, and I'm like, we'll get
No,
to the
no,
horse's pain
no.
later.
So man pain is when usually a female character is, think about when a superhero's girlfriend gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
We're not concerned with her getting killed and her experience of that, but rather how it affects our main character,
The
the
woman
man.
in refrigerators.
Yeah, pretty much. So, like, John Wick doesn't focus on how his wife was killed or how his wife died, even. It
Mm-hmm.
focused on how it affects him.
Yeah.
In this, there's one woman who's alive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's Martha, who's not really super in it. She's basically a tertiary character.
Yeah, and you could also read in a little bit as her being a native woman too. Uh, it kind of being like I don't want to say all-knowing, but like the wise woman,
Yeah.
a sort of matriarch of the group
Mhm.
who's like, her survival is based on her instinct and her wit and knowing the land, which
She basically clues in well to what's going on before anyone else knows what's going on.
well, her and her brother. So,
Mhm.
and in fact, once we're done talking about the soliloquy, we're going to be talking about George in a second. So
But
they kind of
what
get
the
lumped into the
speech-
same person.
Yeah, but what the speech is doing is focusing on Robert Carlyle's face. It cuts away a few
Mhm.
times to other people's reactions.
Namely,
But-
Hart.
But Boyd doesn't say anything he doesn't say his first full sentence until almost 30 minutes into the movie.
Hmm.
So it focuses on Robert Carlyle and his vulnerability in that moment.
Yeah.
It focuses on his frostbitten body,
Mhm.
and it focuses on his face and his reaction to what had happened to him.
And it's also important to note too that like while this is going back to like the soundtrack, it's a relatively quiet scene. Like, as events discussed kind of ramp up, there is background music there, but for the most part, you hear the fire crackling as he's going. And the imagery of fire in this movie does tend to follow his character, and you can see the fire very distinctly in the glasses of Colonel Hart.
Yes.
Which
and
that shot in particular, upon watching it a few times, I'm like, that is a good shot.
The article I was reading attributes a lot of this lack of focus on just how it affects the main character and instead focusing on the character that has been affected.
Yeah.
As it being a female director, which I think is a pretty salient point. Also, the other thing is the male gaze when Robert Carlyle is nude and you get to see his full butt.
Yep.
It's usually with the male gaze, the female form is the desirable, alluring. Like, you can think of how a camera is essentially like a tongue licking a female from top to bottom. In some movies, it's like, oh, yeah. And the male body is repulsive or to be made fun of.
Again, Reich.
In this, it's neither.
Yeah.
It's
like
just a male butt, and he's kind of embarrassed when he realizes he's naked and he covers himself up.
Yeah. And, again, like comparing that to Reich, like, does he have a nice body? Yeah. But the way that it is filmed is absurd.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, that is not a man I want to jump into a river for. So that kind of.
But it's not when you see his Robert Carlyle bottom. It's not played for a joke or played for ew gross. It's definitely just this is the situation we're in right now. Nobody laughs at him. Nobody goes ew penis.
Like you feel cold looking at it. You know, it's a very visceral kind of thing. I personally I'm gonna sexualize his butt anyway. Gaze notwithstanding, but the shot is effective. You feel like you can count his bones and stuff.
And the other thing that this movie really pays close attention to that I feel might also be a thing that can be start that sentence again.
Do it.
Can be attributed to a female director is it leans on this does get actiony and violent, but it definitely is like awkward violent. It's like, I don't know if you've actually seen people actually fighting, dear listener, but it's weird. Like, it's not like an action movie where people are punch, punch, dodge, whatever. It's like struggly and weird and strange and not
if I can
fun
also
or
kind
visceral.
If I can also tap into the sound effects again and the sound editing, it's very dry.
Yeah.
You're not getting like the fun little squishy sounds all the time, except
You're not
for like
getting the Batman
meat.
sound effects.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to remember what movie it was where someone was talking about Bone Tomahawk. There were a lot of people commenting on the sound of that movie because it's so upsetting because everything is so like dry and visceral. Like you can like feel the sounds, and this movie you can definitely feel those sounds too. So not having it be like these glamorized or let me just throw Michael Bay under the bus here, sexualized action scenes.
Yeah. There's no giant like freaking Manny explosions and all of the gore is practical.
Yes.
Like there's no CG in this as far as the gore effects go. There's no CG. I don't know about the rest of the environment. I'm assuming because it's a lower budget. Probably not.
They had to use white sheets.
They couldn't afford it.
Snow.
Yes, white sheets and what did they use? Laundry detergent back in the day.
Yeah.
Asbestos.
They had no budget for snow.
We don't have a snow budget, guys. We're just gonna wait 3 months. But it's not like it's icky. Like the gore is icky. The blood dripping down Boyd's face is like. Listen, I'm gonna be honest. A couple days ago, I tried to rewatch this while I was working, and it just kind of made me nauseous a little bit looking at the gore.
Yeah,
even just looking at not even the latter end of the movie, just looking at the beginning scene with the meat.
Yes,
on the plate and them cutting it, and his leg breaking.
Yeah, that okay. I had to force myself to watch it because every other time I watch it, I always skip it. Dear audience members, we'll give you a fair warning when that comes.
The blood dripping down his face when he's hiding under those bodies.
Yes.
And he comes out with I literally couldn't watch it the one time. I was like, nope, can't watch it today. I've also been intermittent fasting, which I also feel led to my nausea at that
No
scene.
shit.
Yeah, no, I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of a tribute to this female director that it can still be read as a feminist film even without really women in it.
Well, yeah, feminism is not about women. Feminism is the critical lens under which we study gender, sex, and sexuality, and how society views all of that. So feminism does encompass a lot about men. And in this movie, which we will get to in a few minutes here, also really does a good job at deconstructing toxic masculinity. And that wasn't necessarily a buzzword going around back when this was made.
Back in 1999.
Or if it was, it wasn't used quite as mainstream.
I remember hearing it very rarely when I was 8 years old.
Like, it wasn't really rising to the surface, and it wasn't really like a concept that got talked about a whole lot outside of like gender studies kind of places, but this film does do a really good deconstruction of it, and especially with Boyd's character too. He's never called he's never called anything for acting
Mm-hmm.
the way he is. But there's a lot of subtext there where because he has clearly a very bad mental condition and he
Mm-hmm.
just cannot be the soldier that people expect him to, like there's like a lot of that pressure to be a man, and the movie gets that point across
May
without being explicit. The
mm,
movie doesn't dumb that concept down. Like when you're watching it, you can see it.
maybe put a pin in that idea.
We're gonna be talking about that
Put a pin
throughout.
in it, because we have a couple things to say, I'm pretty sure, about Manifest Destiny. But let's get through this movie first.
Like I said, we'll be discussing it throughout the review.
Oh, I want to say things about it, but I don't think it's quite time yet, because there's
No,
more to say about it.
you want me to put a pin in it?
Put a pin in it. I can't do the thing with my... Yeah, I can't do that.
It happens. So
No,
we
can't do it.
so we have a woman, Mrs. McCready, possibly still alive, with a madman that has decided to partake in cannibalism,
Whose name is Colonel Ives.
whose name is Colonel Ives. This is important for later.
Mm-hmm.
So Colonel Hart decides to get the misfit toys together, including Calhoun, although not initially. Calhoun insists on going, but he's just like, yeah, sure, whatever. To go ahead and rescue Mrs. McCready and to arrest/kill Colonel Ives. Before they go out, George, our friendly Native American George, brings out sheepskin or some sort of like animal skin with a picture of a Wendigo.
Oh, no.
That's right, folks. If you have been paying attention to our Instagram and Facebook, you would have known that I posted about something very similar, the Skinwalker. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Wendigo. I'm going to talk a little bit about Skinwalkers because these two tend to get blended, and I have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Wendigo is actually something that comes from the Algonquin tribe. And for those of you who don't know where that is, that's basically a territory that at one point extended from Ontario all the way down into Virginia. So literally on the other side of America. Remember, this is in the like the Sierra Nevada territory, Northern California. According to the Wendigo myth, there's kind of two competing stories that go on, and this itself kind of gets blended, but it gets blended because of how the stories got told from the Algonquins, not because of colonialism. They start off as demons who eat flesh, essentially eating the soul or spirit of men. But if man starts feeding upon each other, cannibalism, they become Wendigos. There's a couple of different competing looks to the Wendigo, but typically speaking, if you actually talk to people who speak to native folks, it's not like a big hairy monster. It's not like Bigfoot. It looks like a person that has been starved and is literally just skin and bone. And, you know, with the movie, Ravenous is very aptly titled because the whole point of the Wendigo, and we're not going to unpin this yet, are we? Is it too soon?
Yeah, go for it.
It's too soon. I'll
Okay.
mention it. I'll mention it, but I won't unpin it. The whole point of consuming things and being unsatiable,
Mm-hmm.
needing more, wanting to expand your palate, maybe westwardly, you know, it's something that definitely, you know, it has a very strong tie to colonialism, even if the myth itself didn't originate when colonizers came here. It was already an existing legend. But then when colonialism happened here in the Americas, that was something that kind of carried over and kind of got perverted and even became a pseudo psychological term for what happens when people resort to cannibalism. I don't know if it's an actual I don't think that's what it is called anymore, but at one point in time, Wendigo syndrome was a thing.
Wendigo psychosis.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually still used or not, but it's in there at least in
Oh,
pop psychology
I
at the
doubt
very
it.
least.
'Cause it
Um,
says that it's humans possessed by a Wendigo spirit, so I doubt that's in like the DSM-5. But
yeah, like at a certain point, I think again, it's like pop psychology kind of thing for when, we didn't have reliable heat sources. Um, but now you may be thinking to yourself, well, wait, this is on the other side of the United States. What is this myth doing in northern Canada? Well, the movie actually explains that the
California.
myth comes from the north, and because of westward expansion, because of manifest destiny, a lot of these things just tend to carry over with travel. And that is an explanation that I am willing to let slide.
And there's a similar idea in the Pacific Northwest too.
Well, that's why I have to talk about the skinwalkers. Not anywhere near Sierra Nevada. This is from the Navajo tribe. Skinwalkers are similar, but not the same. The whole idea with skinwalkers is that they are not human. Skinwalkers deceive people. They can turn themselves into different animals. They can turn themselves into humans. They can manipulate the way people think. This myth is a little bit more difficult to talk about, though, because even though you see a lot of different imagery for skinwalkers, people from Navajo culture very rarely like to talk about it, or at least if you're talking about traditionalists in those cultures, do not like to talk about it, just because it's taboo. So a lot of times when people heard about it, the myths kind of got like distorted over time. They were blended with a lot of other things. Would it be possible for a skinwalker to eat somebody while they were disguised as a human? Probably. Or even possess other people to do that to each other? More than likely. But it's still a very separate myth. And there's this thing that's been happening for the past couple of years, and I don't know where it started. But people have been using the phrase Wendigo to describe things that are very obviously skinwalkers. In fact, the picture that I used to describe skinwalkers, somebody on Instagram said, "That's on a skinwalker. That is a Wendigo." And they actually, they crossed my point, and I'm kind of glad that they did that, because it, like, does it look cool to see like this big monster thing with antlers coming at you? Or somebody turning into that because they were cannibals? That is really cool. But I don't think it's right for people who aren't Native American to be blending myths like that. They're two very distinct things and can be told on their own without that kind of like lack of knowledge of where those come from, especially considering the geography of where it all comes from too. It's one thing if you're like Once Upon a Time, where you're getting all of these fairy tales together and it's just like ludicrous and insane, because a lot of them kind of came from the same sources anyway. These do not. So I'm going to get off my high horse and I'm just going to leave it at
I can do a horse sound.
That was terrifying.
No.
But yeah, if you're not Native American and you're not sure where their myths come from, like do your research before you start blending things. Don't be an idiot.
So essentially, to my idiot minds, my Wendigo versus shapeshifter mind, skinwalker mind, is shapeshifters is essentially, it's a choice. Wendigo is more pushed into it, but in theory, by desperation and starvation, into cannibalism. Sort
of. It's less with skinwalkers. You have to understand it's not human,
and not inherently cannibalistic.
No, it is not. They usually tend to be compared to ancient, like Navajo healing
Okay.
rituals and like the kind of like positive kind of magic. And that's not the right way to say it. But basically, like they're seen as the antithesis of a healer. And they are
Okay.
sort of like the physical embodiment of everything that stands against Navajo values. So it's not even choice necessarily. It's just pure evil. This is just sin incarnate. And with the
Okay.
Wendigo, if anything, that's kind of like being forced to make a really shitty choice. You know,
I'm
you don't
eating a
have to
plantain
resort
chip.
to cannibalism under those conditions,
Okay.
you know? But because you're taking it upon yourself to take that life and eat someone's soul and not let them be buried the way that they should be buried,
Mm-hmm.
you're actively becoming a monster. You're losing your humanity.
Okay. I gotcha.
So, in that sense, thematically, you can probably compare them. But as far as like the imagery and the
Origin.
origin of it, no.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that was a really long way of saying that this movie is about Wendigos.
It's about Wendigos.
Wendigos.
Where Wendy goes, I shall go also.
Boo!
So what happens after
So,
the search party heads out?
well, the search party heads out, and Toffler takes a tumble, getting a fractured rib, lots of blood, and as they sleep for the night, Toffler all of a sudden wakes up. I should note that Toffler speaks in a very quiet voice. It takes a lot for him to shout. So the fact that
Yep.
he is screaming is pretty alarming to people. Robert
Is this where he
Carlyle
says my
is on
favorite line?
Robert Carlyle is on the other side of the tent, huddled away, looking ashamed of himself. Toffler is mumbling something, and everybody's asking him to repeat himself over and over again. Amanda, what did Toffler say?
He was licking me!
Daddy Carlyle was licking him.
If you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. There's that male gaze again.
I love the male gaze.
And the male strights.
Just not the gaze, Gaze.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Calhoun now needs to be tied, bound, because he's not to be trusted. And they eventually get to the cave. And it's Boyd and Reich who go into the cave to try to find Mrs. McCready and Ives. And this scene is really difficult to explain, so I'm going to try to do as best I can. While they're inside the cave, that's Boyd and Reich, outside, Hart, George, and Toffler are going back and forth between keeping an eye on Calhoun and keeping an eye on the cave. Calhoun is going insane. He's hyperventilating. He's digging in the ground, trying to... We don't know exactly until...
He's kind of woofing, if I remember right.
Yeah, it's like...
Weird.
like that.
Robert Carlyle's just acting the hell out.
Yeah, it's the performance we deserve. So why is he digging in the ground?
Need right now.
Huh? What'd you say?
Frankly, it's the performance we need right now.
Yes, I too want to become feral and stab people. Did I say stab people? Yes. Robert Carlyle has a knife.
Mm-hmm.
And stabs Colonel Hart.
Well, he frees himself.
Well, yeah. I'm trying to get this story along here.
Go for it. I'm gonna nom more plantain chips.
So, he frees himself, stabs Hart. George tries to kill him. Because he has access to Hart's pistol, he shoots George. We're going to go into the cave for a minute. If you're wondering what happened to Calhoun, why that knife was there, well, it's because Calhoun may in fact not be who he says he is. Because they find a bunch of skeletons in the cave, including a woman's skull.
And there's one extra skeleton.
There's an extra skeleton. And underneath that skeleton is a uniform belonging to Colonel Ives.
Uh-oh.
So, Boyd and Reich rush outside to find the carnage. And as they're trying to get outside, Robert Carlyle is going to Toffler, who, remember, he is already injured. He's freaking out, and Robert Carlyle just looks at him and goes, "Run." And then a very silly sounding face
smile on his face, and he's adorable.
It's great. So Boyd and Reich see what happens. Hart is barely alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, no, like go after him. Like, leave me be. Reich, being the super soldier, is sort of taking the reins on this, does the, let's go kill the bastard line. Gets stabbed in the chest like a chum by Robert Carlyle. And falls off a cliff in a very hilarious way. I may or may not have done the goofy sound effect when I watched it. And Boyd shoots Calhoun in the chest.
And it doesn't work.
It does not work. And him getting up after being shot is admittedly a very creepy scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's effective. It really is. Realizing that George might have been right about the whole Wendigo myth and the whole, cannibalism might make you a bit of a Superman sometimes, he just jumps off the cliff willingly.
Yeah, Robert Carlyle kind of backs him up to a cliff with like blood in his teeth, and he's like giggling and like hee.
So yeah, Boyd is just like, you know what? I'll just see myself out of this movie.
Fuck off!
And this is where he tumbles down the hill. This is gross. Folks, if you just want to go ahead and skip like a minute of this, we'll see you back here.
If you have an issue, trigger warning for broken bones protruding.
Yeah, there's really not a good way to phrase that trigger without triggering people.
Yeah, that's why I kind of...
I hate this part, but I forced myself to watch it because cinematically speaking, it does a very good job at what it needs to do. He tumbles down the cliff.
When the Foley guy breaks out the celery, that's usually when I find something on my phone that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
No, not the carrots.
Well, we'll get there. Boyd tumbles down the cliff. He bumps into the presumably dead corpse of Reich that isn't quite dead yet.
That is pretty funny, though.
It's very funny.
His face.
Reich struggles for a bit to try to strangle him, but just eventually he's dead. Robert Carlyle does get to the pit, and there's a really good shot of like Boyd, for the second time in his soldier career, trying to wait it out and play dead.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not using his strength or the very foolish bravery that Reich had and that kind of masculine behavior. He's using his wits to try to survive instead of being overtly violent.
Yeah.
Okay?
And even in death, Reich's wolf-like bright blue husky eyes are like wide open, and it's that is actually kind of funny. Even if you skip the rest of like this kind of plot hole cul-de-sac thing, look at Reich's eyes, because that's pretty funny. He's just like, Arr!
It actually kind of doubles up pretty nicely too for the lack of effects in this scene, because this is where you want to go ahead and skip. Boyd's leg is broken, and you can see his leg protruding, and it is disturbing, and I hate it. I hate this every single time I watch it. So he's physically incapable of moving. Reich is dead, and even though he has like dirt and stuff on his face, his eyes are so bright and the dirt around it is so gritty that it almost kind of looks like he's decaying as we speak. And that's not what the effects are, but that's almost what the movie is suggesting, that he's sort of acting like a time. He's sort of like a clock, so to speak.
Why are you ruining the fun image of his Neil McDonough's bright blue eyes just wide freaking open dead?
I mean, it's hilarious. Don't get me wrong, but I'm also saying that like his bright blue eyes hilariously staring at you even through death. They took advantage of that, and I'm
Yeah,
proud
sure.
of them.
Mhm.
So he is in there for what I believe is only a few days, but they're intentionally kind of vague about it. If you go by
Well,
like,
they
the
said
moves.
when they sent David Arquette off, a part we skipped. They sent David Arquette and Martha off to get supplies
Yeah.
before Calhoun shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And they said 3 days
Oh, okay.
to be back in 3 days. I actually caught that this time because there are very few markers for time passing.
Mm-hmm.
But they
Like,
said, yeah, be back in 3 days.
yeah, it's all the time itself is very short in general, but I'm glad you pointed that out
Yeah,
because
but you could assume that David Arquette probably fucked around for a while because as he rides off, he's like, peyote and women. And Martha's like, no women.
there you go, Martha. So like, he's in the pit. He attempts to fix his own leg, and thank you, sound editing. The actual sound of what should be the leg snapping is not what happens. It's the sound of David Arquette chopping wood, and that dry sound is so much worse. It really is. And of course, while he's down there wanting to survive, he eats Reich.
Neil
So,
McDonough is a snack, to be fair.
I gotta ask you this.
Yes.
Because this scene is supposed to be like the, uh-oh, it's time for Boyd to become the Wendigo now. But when he was buried under the mounds of corpses, the beginning of the movie,
God bless you.
and has all that blood dripping on his face.
Down his throat.
Down his throat.
And he
Is
said
that
something
not...
had changed.
Yes. Is the movie is kind of ambiguous about it because it's not really called to attention necessarily, but it would account for how weak he becomes. And or it's like maybe he's a Wendigo. Maybe it's PTSD.
Random question, not random question.
Mm-hmm.
Does he eat anything before Neil McDonough? He drinks. He has a drink with the pedophile.
We do not see him. We don't
see him eat
at all. And it's mentioned a little bit later on from other people that he does not eat meat.
Yeah.
So if he did eat anything at all, there were witnesses to him not eating. Like,
well, no, he doesn't. It's not that Boyd doesn't eat meat. Guy Pearce doesn't. I don't think they say that.
Guy Pearce is Boyd.
No, I'm saying that the actor does not eat meat. He's a vegetarian.
But they literally say that Boyd's character in the movie does not eat meat.
Oh, really?
There's a scene later on. It's again, there's like a lot of throwaway lines that if you rewatch the movie, it does do a good job with the world building. Yeah. But we do not see him eat anything.
Yeah.
And
I was wondering that. Yeah, because I wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's interesting because you have Robert Carlyle's character, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, who's like really embracing what he's become, and you have Boyd. You have Guy Pearce's character who he does not talk a lot, but you can just see him being physically repulsed by everything around him.
If you want to draw a parallel, think of Interview with a Vampire.
Yes.
Think of Lestat versus Louis.
That is a really good comparison.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of parallels to vampirism in this too, especially with the way Carlyle looks near the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you could, if you want a really good shorthand, Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah, it's And again, it doesn't treat the audience like we can't see it. It's all acted. It's all shown.
Mm-hmm.
So even like this is the midway point of the movie, and like we can already kind of maybe write like, I don't know, 5 dissertations.
Oh God, there's so much I could say about this movie.
Well, eventually Boyd makes it back to the camp, okay?
Mm-hmm.
With the theme, the Ravenous theme playing, and I love this theme so much because it's like it's odd. It's very odd. You almost think it's comical to a certain point, but then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden there's like these really heart-tugging strings that come in. So it's a very complex piece of music.
But like we said earlier, it makes you uncomfortable because it's kind
Yes.
of a silly, almost lighthearted, like we're gonna get into some shenanigans music. Like,
And then it
and-
punches you.
yeah, and then you're like, oh no,
Oh.
and they usually play it over kind of upsetting things.
Yeah. So like Boyd's trek home,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting because like you see him struggling, but like as he gets closer, his leg still isn't perfect, but you do see him physically not struggling with it as much
Mm-hmm.
once basically the food is digested.
Mm-hmm.
David Arquette greets him. Dr. Knox is still there.
Calhoun's not.
Calhoun is not there, which is fine. General Slauson, I believe, is
beginning.
there from the beginning. The person who shunned him away to this camp in the first place. He tries explaining what happened, and he's like, hey, we went to that cave, and there were no bodies there. We didn't see anything. Oh, by the way, say hello to the new colonel, since Colonel Hart isn't here anymore. Meet Colonel Ives.
Mm-hmm.
Who is Colonel Ives played by, Amanda?
It's this little actor. You might have known him. He's kind of niche. Robert Carlyle.
Oh, Daddy's back.
Yeah, the boys are back in town, and Boyd is back in the fort.
Boyd faints.
The Boyd is back in town.
Boyd is on the floor.
Yep.
So yeah, he just is not doing well. Boyd is having a
He
time.
passes out too, doesn't he? He like
Yep.
faints.
He does. He faints upon seeing him and then cowers on the floor. David Arquette makes fun of him for being a loon, and when David Arquette is making fun of you for being crazy, you have problems.
Let alone his character.
Mm-hmm.
But he tries to tell Slauson that Ives is Calhoun and
Mhm.
a cannibal.
Yeah.
And essentially, he got stabbed somewhere in the
He
arm.
got stabbed. He got shot.
Shoulder.
He got shot in the
whatever.
shoulder.
Shoulder. That was it. Because Carlisle has to rip open, or unbutton his uniform and show his
Mhm.
shoulder.
Both of them.
And yeah, he says, yeah, he got like stabbed in the shoulder or whatever, and he has no injuries, so they don't believe him.
Yeah.
And then they leave.
And let me just see here. Oh shit. I missed a bit of dialogue from earlier, but I'm actually just going to leave that for later. Eventually, there's a scene where Ives and Boyd are together alone,
Mm-hmm.
and Ives just basically confronts him like, yep, I finished off the rest of Reich. Whatever you didn't eat, I finished it up.
Mm-hmm.
And he gives a second account of how he became who he was. Not as Colonel Ives, but from a man with tuberculosis. Do not at me. That is the movie's actual way of saying what it was. I do not want to
Mhm.
hear about anachronism because that's not the point.
It's consumption. Okay, whatever.
Yeah. So there's part of me that says, okay, I could actually believe this second origin story of him being a very sickly person who had depression, couldn't eat, would vomit up pints of blood, and was on the way to a sanitarium, I think he was saying too, when all this happened. And then because of this happy little cannibal accident, he became stronger, and it's just like, I'm perfectly fine with being a stronger person because I was not that great before.
Well, it wasn't
Not
a starvation
unlike
thing. He
his
said he
character
wanted
of
to try
Rumpelstiltskin.
it. He said he wanted to try being a Wendigo.
Yeah.
Or try eating somebody else's flesh to see if it would make him stronger. It wasn't he was forced into it.
Yeah, it was a scout.
Necessarily.
There was a scout who told him that that's the case. And he ate the scout first. And he's like, yep, that scout was right.
Yep.
So do I personally believe this story? I do. But do you, dear audience members, have to believe it too? No. It does not matter if what he is saying is true or not. His reaction is what matters. The fact that he is being an advocate for cannibalism, the fact that he is perfectly fine being this power-hungry monster, you know? Boyd does not take this information very well, tries to kill him. Martha stops him. Knox comes out, threatens to arrest him, tries to see where David Arquette is, and no one can find David Arquette. Martha checks the stables, and the horses are dead. I believe she is sent to go get General Slauson again, because where is everybody? And, let's see here. Knox is killed.
Yeah.
But not...
Oh no,
Boyd's
Cleves is killed. And that's why Boyd is tied up.
Yeah.
They think Boyd did it.
Yeah, they think Boyd did it because the horses are dead, Cleves, David Arquette, is dead, and Martha is sent out to go get General Slauson. And while she is gone, Knox is killed, not by Ives.
But who? Who is left?
Hart.
Who?
What? I thought he died. No. He was on the verge of death whenever Reich died and Boyd jumped off the cliff. But Robert Carlyle came back and nursed his buddy to health.
No.
Yeah. Because I guess I think he even has the one line, you know, like, it gets pretty lonely being a cannibal. So, we got a couple of really good lines and ideas ahead of us, because we are now left with 3 cannibals, Wendigos even.
Yep.
Martha is out grabbing more potential victims. And, you know, Knox is being turned into stew. So while he is cooking, I think that there's some good dialogue about Western expansion and things along those lines. Let me get this out. The court is yours, my dear.
So, Ives talks to Boyd about how people will be heading out west because of the gold rush after winter passes. And he suggests that they choose people selectively who are going west and eateth them. Because people are heading west because of the gold rush and manifest destiny, which is an idea that
you don't have to give the history lesson. We just white people
in the
are shitty.
1800s, people wanted to own Americans wanted to own all of this continent and take it away from natives and the Mexicans too, who were in California specifically. So Ives views this cannibalism as a chance for both survival and supremacy, essentially. He can be a gods among men with his boyfriend Boyd,
Mm-hmm.
and they can kind of rule this little corner, kind of maybe above human, maybe more human than other people. You know, like a
Uber?
superior kind of person.
Uber?
Maybe an Uber man.
Yeah.
So,
Incidentally, I am so glad Reich died.
ugh, yeah.
Because could you imagine him being a part of that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's essentially this conflict between Ives, who is the embodiment of kind of that American ideal of we were going to take over the country, and it's better to eat than be eaten, essentially. And that's what kind of leads to the climax of this. Because long story short, it turns into a huge old fight, and everyone dies. Period. Unless you want to get into more specifics about it.
Give me 1 second here.
Yeah. Because Boyd does not want to cannibal. He does not want to live as a Wendigo. And Guy Pearce spits out lamb stew as soon as he takes a bite out of it during filming.
Yeah, so when you're talking about like this kind of idea of being sympathetic
Mm-hmm.
instead of going ahead and pushing forward with a very supremacist agenda.
Mm-hmm.
The whole movie kind of feels like that
Mm-hmm.
because, like, even though, see, this is like probably where the only kind of like in-script criticism I have is Boyd is depicted as being so gentle that I have no idea how he got the rank of lieutenant in the first place. Like,
Maybe
nothing
his
he does
dad
suggests that.
was like, maybe his dad was like
Yeah,
a colonel or something.
Like, he had to have been forced into it because, like, he freezes in the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why he took over the enemy line in the first place was for his own survival, not because he actually believed in the stuff that he was fighting for.
And because of inherited Wendigo courage from his commander.
Yes.
His commander's blood went down his throat,
Mm-hmm.
and then he found the strength and courage, if you want to call it that.
His spirit. His fighting spirit.
Yes, to take over the Mexican troops.
So
to get
without
their
that
commander.
indoctrination of feeling superior, you're going to retain that empathy and know that you really shouldn't have that kind of view with other people. And even though, again, these are things that aren't explicitly stated, but the whole manifest destiny thing is.
And what he gets punished for that sends him to Fort Spencer to begin with is essentially that he froze on the battlefield. In other words, he viewed the enemy as fully human as he was. Essentially, his empathy made him freeze, and that's a liability when your goal is to expand westward and kill anyone who gets in your way, which is what the Mexican-American War was.
Yeah. So,
and in the same way, his empathy leads him, instead of freezing, to fight Ives. And ultimately, Boyd sacrifices himself to keep the feeding off of other people from spreading further. So he essentially wants to try to, Daenerys Targaryen style, break the wheel of manifest destiny in this microcosm.
Yeah. It's a very interesting film to watch now because of that reason.
And what happens in the end when Slauson comes back up?
Well, We'll get there. We're not quite there yet.
Well, okay.
Because before the big ultimate fight, which is really well choreographed, really well
like
set
I said,
up.
visceral. Very visceral and awkward, kind of.
It feels real because of
that. It takes
it's a
people... When you hit people, it takes them a while to get back up. Like, they kind of go through stuff, stumble a little.
There's a bit where Guy Pearce takes like a hatchet and hits Robert Carlyle's arm with it, and it doesn't come clean off. It's just like this very awkward wound.
Yeah.
Where it's not off, but it's definitely not functional anymore.
It's not really working.
Huh?
It's not really working.
Yeah. So it's like stuff like that, like those little details that make it especially like gory and almost fun to watch. Almost. Without being very, very disturbing.
The reason that Boyd eats human meat again is, Ives hurts him. He almost kills him and says, eat or be eaten. And he is then tied up when he doesn't want to be a cannibal anymore. And then he convinces Hart to free him. And then Ives kills Hart, who no longer wants to live as cannibal.
Yeah.
We kind of grazed over that. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And again, if you're going to be that person who's like, well, why does Hart die instantly, but Robert Carlyle and Boyd have to get into this fight and have it be like a Highlander thing where one of them kills the other one kind of deal? Again, that doesn't matter.
Well, in Hart...
The mythology is not the key focus of the story.
And one could argue that Hart also no longer wanted to live.
Yeah.
He no longer wanted to be part of this struggle.
He lost the spirit. You know? Because he was only basically resurrected by... I guess it would probably be from either Robert Carlyle's blood or from
what's his name? Yeah.
Or George.
Yeah.
You know? So I think whenever that left, he just was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. So like the scene where Boyd eventually eats more or less to just like get enough strength to fight Robert Carlyle.
To fart Robert Carlyle? Sorry.
To fight Robert Carlyle. That's after he digests him.
Man, soldiers make me gassy.
It is like a nice little scene because, like, there is the one line that, the throwaway line that I will say, Jeffrey Jones does very well. They're all sitting around the table. Boyd is bleeding. He goes, how civilized.
And it's kind of funny also when Guy Pearce starts eating the stew. Watch him not swallow.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. Once Guy Pearce is a vegetarian and was like, oh, apparently the stew was really good according to Robert Carlyle, but Guy Pearce would spit after every time the camera would cut. So watch him not swallow. He spits. He doesn't swallow.
I knew you were going to say
God, we've been too serious for too long this episode.
I know, but
it feels good to have a good...
I haven't been like too jokey because I love this movie so much, and it's so good. It deserves better. So, Hart dies. General Slauson and Martha are on their way back, and Boyd is just like, screw this. I need to make sure that this man doesn't hurt anybody else. So they get into this visceral fight that has like pseudo premonition kind of stuff going on, which is just sort of like that again, you can kind of look at it through like being through the female gaze almost of like there being like a deeper spiritual connection between
Mhm.
these two men, you know?
And they die in each other's arms, and it's romantic.
Yeah, in a bear trap.
In a bear trap.
Amanda, is that how you're gonna kill me?
No.
Aw. We're gonna go
No.
out Thelma and Louise style, aren't we?
Yeah, damn straight.
Okay. Because it's either
With a
Thelma
bear
and
trap.
Louise or you push me back first into a bear trap and it's like double suicide.
That
And Robert
was
Robert
really
Carlyle's final line.
sneaky. Sorry, I
Yes.
talked over you.
Okay, so we'll try that one more time. And Robert Carlyle says his final lines.
That was really sneaky. Ugh.
Yes.
It's pretty
And then
great,
he also
'cause it
says,
was. Oh, sorry.
you know, if you die first, I'll eat you, but if I die first, what will
What
you
will
do?
you do?
You
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
and it's like one of those moments where as they both die, it's really kind of upsetting because Slauson comes in, he doesn't see the corpses or anything. He
And
goes to the
what do his
leftover.
menses do?
Huh?
What do his menses do?
The menses?
His menses. What do they? His men, his soldiers. What do they do?
Well, I
Was
can't
it
remember
him?
what they
Was it
do,
his men?
but he, Slauson
Mhm.
himself, stirs the stew,
Stews the stir.
stews the stir, and slurps the stir stew,
Mm-hmm. Gets a
eating
big
man.
ol' hunk of meat.
So,
So, what do we do?
Martha peeks into the barn where the two are laying in the bear trap. And it's just like, you know what? I don't have to deal with these white people anymore. I'm just
Fucking
going to
white people, and rides off.
By far the best part of that movie.
Yes.
It's
Good
a
job,
great
Martha. You're the
ending.
smart one.
So,
What I was saying about, and this is kind of what I wanted to say, kind of my last thought on the manifest destiny idea,
mhm.
is yes, Boyd sacrifices himself and chooses not to continue this destruction. But with Slauson eating the stew, it doesn't stop. One person's choice to try to stop this does not stop the system.
You can't blame systemic prejudices on individual flaws.
Your personal choice, whether you should eat or be eaten, does not matter a whit to the system that consumes.
Yeah. And again, we are not explained or we are not told this concept like dummies.
Mm-hmm.
The film respects us.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. I think you said it really nicely. You know, there's not a lot of women in this movie, but this is definitely a feminist film.
And it's definitely anti-exploitation-y, you know?
It's respectful enough to where I wouldn't say it's exploitive. Could it have been better?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, everything could always be better.
Yeah.
But it's just the idea that despite what your individual choice may be, eat or be eaten, manifest destiny continues. And to a larger point, exploitation continues. Consumption of people that are vulnerable to you continues. You know, it made me think of good old One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the combine that eats people.
Yes.
It's this big industrialized system. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it's the hospital. In our lives, it could be capitalism. Comrade?
Yep.
It
Comrade.
feeds off of the people who are most vulnerable to it. And it just keeps on going on. So the choice isn't really eat or be eaten. It's
Mm-hmm.
what can you do to try to stop that in your own environment.
And kind of building off of that a little bit,
Hmm.
there's a really good scene that kind of culminates this idea of indoctrinating people into believing their superiority over others,
Hmm.
but also kind of blended with um, the notion of male sexuality being dominant no matter where it is being targeted
Hmm.
at necessarily. Because like we just kind of need to get this out of the way. A lot of the homoeroticism in the movie doesn't actually have to do with sexuality. It has to do with how men perceive their own dominance over each other.
Hmm.
Okay. So can you kind of make fun of it and make gay jokes? Like, yeah, I do.
Oh
It's
yeah, we
funny.
definitely did when we first watched the
Oh my
movie.
God, yeah. But
Half a box
it
of white wine in.
it's you think it was only half.
Watch it with
Um,
Muppet Treasure Island. It's great.
it was a great back-to-back feature. I can't explain why, but the kind of culminating of like male dominance and white dominance, I think, is really nicely summed up by when Robert Carlyle is talking, and
Hmm.
uh, Boyd is more or less saying that he's not going to resort to cannibalism, and he says it is not courage to resist me, it's courage to accept me. You're
Hmm.
already one of us. Almost.
Hmm.
And the way that he is saying and delivering that line is very close to him. He has a cut and is kind of taunting him with that cut. And it's very sexualized, the whole thing. But again, that sexual kind of pressure is from dominance. And I think that there's a lot of times where people say that they're sympathetic towards the plights of women or towards Native Americans, towards Black folk.
Hmm.
We always talk about being good allies
Hmm.
and trying to like kind of more or less capitalize on our allyship.
Yeah.
But you're always that kind of conversation away from someone like Ives being, well, you're already in this league.
Yeah.
Why not just take that extra step and really reap those benefits?
Well, and if you're thinking about exploitation too,
Mm-hmm.
and Ives says that we won't kill randomly, we'll kill selectively. We don't want to break up families. And it's kind of a joke in that, but it also kind of harkens back to the quote re-education of Native
Oh, yeah.
Americans who
Mm-hmm.
were pulled from their children, who were pulled from their families and given American names, American Anglo-Saxon white
Their hair
people
was cut.
names. Their hair was cut and they were given suits and dresses and then sent back home after being stripped of their heritage and their
Yeah.
identity and saying, okay, here you go. And that's why I commented earlier on Martha and George, the
Mm-hmm.
two native people in the film, are
With
given
very not
very
native names.
Anglo-Saxon names.
Yeah.
So
It's
that idea of, oh, well, we don't want to split up families. We're just going to take you for a little bit and educate you like a boarding school. It'll
mm-hmm.
be really nice. You know, we are not
Mm-hmm.
breaking up your family. We're going to civilize you. We're going to make you better. We're going to make you as close to this above human as we can. And
Yeah.
then send you home to spread that to your families. And once they see how great we've made their children, the parents will probably follow, or at worst, they'll die off.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's dense.
So
It is
you're
very,
already
very
there.
dense.
You're already mostly there. You just got to kick it
Mm-hmm.
over a little bit.
Yeah, it's like you got to commit to the full lifestyle of exploitation to
Hmm.
really survive. You
Hmm.
have to let your empathy go.
Or you can be like Boyd and try to fight it. But
Mm-hmm.
as a person alone in the wilderness, you're not going
Mm-hmm.
to succeed. Not on
Yeah.
a large scale. Or you can be like Martha, who bamps off and is like,
Yeah.
I'm just not going to play this game at all. Like,
Yeah.
I'm fighting a losing battle. I want to survive in my own life and kind of,
Hmm.
to quote Hadestown, keep your head low and
Yep.
duck out. And you can't hold that against Martha because she is working in a world where that nothing is going to work for her. The color of her skin's not going to work for her, and her gender is not going to work for her.
Hmm.
She can't stop it. She wouldn't have been
Yeah.
able to.
And I'm going to
God,
be
this got
really, really
depressing.
honest with you.
Uh-huh.
The myth of Janice barely applies to this
It's
because
more like
it's more of
trivia.
like a call out for the act of transformation and change.
Mm-hmm. Into
But he's
Calhoun
more
Ives.
benevolent though. He's more benevolent than he is like any kind of like demon kind of change, but
Oh
has
yeah.
a nice little tidbit to those of us who like our mythology.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate it. I
The
like a film
two
that
the
thinks I'm
two
smart.
faces of Calhoun coming
Yep.
off initially as an empathetic person, and then
Hmm.
as a true monster is his second face.
Yes.
It's kind of like a little trivia hint
Yeah.
thing. That's when I first watched this movie. I'm like, wait, that's a weird name to crop up.
Yeah.
So,
And why focus on his face?
oh God, it's so good.
Um,
We've been
you know
talking
what?
for a really long time.
This
But you
movie
know
is
what?
worth
This
that
movie's
discussion.
great. This movie's great. And
Well,
if you don't want to dive into Manifest Destiny and you don't want to dive into the system and how it consumes while it is consuming the people who are in it, you know what? You can just watch it as a fun fucking movie. You can.
yeah.
You can totally shut off your brain and watch this movie. But it's fun when you don't. And
Mhm.
it gives you treats for not shutting off your brain. It'll reward you for not turning off your brain and watching it. Unlike a lot of movies where you're like, dude, you're reading too much into a stupid fucking movie. This
Mhm.
one will give you little like gifts. Kind of like Sorry to Bother You, which I just watched, which is also
Um,
kind of thematically similar to this. That would probably make a good double feature.
you know what? It would make an excellent feature. Unfortunately, we can't really talk about it on this show, but probably on Dreadful Pennies, I would talk about it.
Oh my god, that'd be fun.
Hmm.
We should do a
So,
Dreadful Pennies on stuff we've been watching during quarantine.
yeah. And I'm currently reading something that would apply here. I don't know. Amanda, I'm going to ask you this
Mm-hmm.
first. Uh, would you ever want to talk about books on this show?
Sure. I haven't been
Um,
reading because I don't read if I'm not paid to anymore, but I
see,
can talk about stuff.
for for my line of work, I have to stare at a screen for a long enough time
Ugh.
that when I get to read a paper book, I actually kind of enjoy it again.
Yeah.
And I've been reading The Starless Sea. I got it from the library,
Ooh.
and it is full. It's if you like storytelling and fairy tales and just
Mm-hmm.
like the art of writing a really, really good magical driven story,
Mm-hmm.
it is so good. I haven't finished it yet, so I'll give you my final thoughts on it later, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of want to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna read something this weekend because I'm actually going on a mini vacation. So.
Yeah. What if we did like not like a book club, but where like maybe once a month or so, we each bring a book that's kind of fairy tale-ish or mythish,
Sure.
and we just do like a little discussion, take a break from Once Upon a Time, because Lord knows I can't keep on talking about it before getting
Oh my
angry.
god, exactly. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely watch Ravenous. Watch Sorry to Bother You too. It's pretty much
Yeah.
along the same lines, but definitely more comedic, I'd say, and lighter in tone.
And
And
watch Muppet Treasure Island after both of those.
and if you liked kind of our mini deep dive into Ravenous, I would
Hmm.
really honestly recommend the Faculty of Horrors episode on Ravenous.
Hmm.
It's a podcast done by people who work at the Rue Morgue in Toronto.
Ooh.
And it is an excellent podcast, and they do like research and shit. They do like JSTOR academic shit, but it's fun.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna recommend that podcast for
Yeah.
something to listen to during quarantine. They've done a
And
summer of plague all summer. They do one
let's
episode
see.
a month. Sorry, but I'm a big
I
fan of them.
I was just gonna say, like, if you made it through this entire review and you haven't watched Ravenous, I'm kind of ashamed of you.
What have you done? Stop now and watch Ravenous. Stop.
Yeah.
Don't listen to
Yeah.
us. You want to watch Robert Carlyle eat people. He
Yeah.
eats people.
He
For once,
eats
you don't have
people.
to bleep me out. Dennis! Robert Carlyle eats people. He eats them. He eats them up. Nom, nom, nom.
Of course he does, honey. We all know.
Oh, God.
Oh my goodness. You know what?
He's licking me.
He's licking me. I actually say that about my cats all the time.
I do too.
My one cat, Tybalt, like Puck, he headbutts me, but Tybalt licks. And he has like the grossest lick ever. And it'll like wake you up out of your sleep. And I'll just like jolt up, and then Danny will ask me what's wrong, and that's what I'll say. I'll go, he's licking me. So, you know what? I'm gonna do something here that I don't think I will ever do for an episode of Once Upon a Time. A whole bushel of apples.
Oh my God. All the apples.
Mm-hmm. The whole bloody orchard.
Oh God, all of the meat. I'm making chicken for dinner after this, and I don't even want to eat meat.
Nah.
Oh God.
So yeah, go check it out. Educate yourself. Don't just use the aesthetic of things because they look cool. Do your research before you use the aesthetic of things. And if you really don't know much about Manifest Destiny and all the havoc it wreaked on people,
listen to the
look it
Faculty
up.
of Horror.
Yeah.
They really go into it. It's pretty great.
So yeah, that's it on our end.
Yeah.
I'm Sam Logsdon still. Nothing has changed in the past 2 hours.
I'm Amanda Pierce.
Have you changed in the last 2 hours?
I don't know, but I'm really hungry.
Okay. Well, we love you folks, and remember, it may not be the end.
It may not be happy.
But he was licking me!
He was licking me!
Take care.